4 generations, America sold the world a dream. Not a product, not a company, not even a country. A dream, a promise so powerful that millions crossed oceans to chase it. People left behind families, friends, entire lives, all for one chance to build something better. The promise was simple: work hard, play by the rules, stay out of trouble, and one day, you'll have a home, a family, financial security, a comfortable retirement, a better life than the generation before you. That promise became known as the American Dream, and for a long time, it seemed real, very real. But today, something feels different. Millions of Americans are working harder than ever, yet many feel stuck, more connected than ever, yet more anxious than ever, earning more money than previous generations, yet struggling to build wealth. The question is, what happened? How did the richest nation in modern history become a place where so many people feel financially trapped? Where did the dream go? Did it disappear? Did it fail? Or was it replaced by something entirely different? Tonight, we are following the story of the American dream, from its rise, to its peak, to the moment millions began realizing something had changed. And by the end of this documentary, you may never look at modern America the same way again. To understand why so many people believe the American dream is dying, we first need to understand why people believed in it in the first place. Because contrary to what many assume, the American dream wasn't originally about becoming rich. It wasn't about private jets, luxury cars, or becoming a millionaire before 30. The dream was much simpler, and perhaps far more powerful. It was the belief that ordinary people could build extraordinary lives, not because they were born wealthy, not because they had special connections, but because they were willing to work. For much of the 20th century, that belief seemed justified. After World War II, America entered one of the most remarkable economic expansions in history. Factories were booming, businesses were growing, jobs were plentiful, wages were rising, and for millions of families, life seemed to improve year after year. For many Americans, a single income was enough. One paycheck could often support an entire household. A family could buy a home, raise children, own a car, take vacations, and still save for retirement. Think about that for a moment. One income, one job, one career, and yet an entire family could build a stable future around it. Today, that reality feels almost impossible to many young workers. But decades ago, it was normal, or at least normal enough that people believed it would continue forever. And that's what made the dream so powerful. People weren't just earning money. They were building confidence. Confidence that tomorrow would be better than today. Confidence that their children would live better lives. Confidence that progress was inevitable. Imagine being a young couple during that era. You graduate. You find a job. You save money. You buy a house. Not a mansion. Not a luxury estate. Just a simple home. A place to build a future. And the remarkable part? For many families, that goal was achievable. Not easy, but achievable. The difference matters. Because when people believe their effort can lead to progress, they become optimistic. When effort produces results, hope grows. And for decades, hope became one of America's most valuable assets. The dream wasn't perfect. Many people were excluded from opportunities. Many communities faced barriers. Many families struggled. But despite its flaws, the dream felt alive. Because every year, millions of people could point to real examples. Neighbors buying homes, friends getting promotions, families moving into the middle class, children attending college. The future seemed open. The ladder seemed climbable. And perhaps most importantly, people believed the system was moving in the right direction. That belief changed everything. Because economies don't run only on money. They run on expectations. And during the golden age of the American dream, expectations were incredibly powerful. People expected things to improve. People expected their hard work to matter. People expected tomorrow to be brighter than today. For a while, they were right. But hidden beneath the surface, changes were already beginning. Changes that most people couldn't see. Changes that would take decades to fully reveal themselves. Changes that would slowly transform the American dream into something very different. At first, the cracks were almost invisible. A small increase here, a policy change there, a shift in the economy, a rise in costs. Nothing dramatic, nothing that made headlines. But over time, those small cracks grew larger, and larger, and larger, until eventually, millions of Americans began asking a question their grandparents never imagined asking. If the economy is growing, why does life feel harder? And that question would become the beginning of a much bigger story. Because the American dream didn't disappear in a single day. It didn't collapse overnight. It didn't vanish with one election or one recession. Instead, it slowly began changing shape. So slowly that many people didn't notice until years later. And the first major warning sign wasn't housing. It wasn't debt. And it wasn't inflation. It started somewhere far more unexpected. In the very thing Americans believed would guarantee success: education. For generations, Americans were told a simple story. If you want a better future, go to college. If you want financial security, go to college. If you want a good career, go to college. Again and again, the message was repeated. Teachers said it. Parents said it. Politicians said it. Television said it. Society said it. College wasn't presented as one option. It was presented as the option. The safest path. The smartest path. The path to success. And for many years, that advice made sense. A college degree often opened doors. Higher salaries. Better opportunities. More stability. A better life. So millions followed the advice, exactly as instructed. But then something changed. The more people believed college was essential, the more expensive it became. Year after year, decade after decade, tuition rose faster than inflation, faster than wages, faster than many families could keep up with. Yet students kept enrolling, because they believed the promise. Take on debt today, earn more tomorrow, borrow now, prosper later. And at first, that seemed reasonable. After all, what could go wrong? If education is an investment, surely the returns will cover the cost. Right? Because something strange happened. The price of the ticket kept rising, but the reward at the finish line didn't rise nearly as fast. Millions of students graduated, entered the workforce, and discovered a reality that felt very different from the one they had imagined. The degree was no longer a guarantee. The job market was changing. Competition was increasing. Automation was expanding. Globalization was reshaping industries. And suddenly, many graduates found themselves carrying enormous debt into a world that looked nothing like the one they had prepared for. Imagine beginning adult life already owing tens of thousands of dollars, before buying a house, before starting a family, before building wealth, before saving for retirement. You're already behind. Not because you failed, not because you made terrible decisions, but because the cost of entry became extraordinarily expensive. And here's where the story becomes important. Because debt doesn't simply take money. It takes options. Every monthly payment limits flexibility. Every obligation narrows freedom. Every financial burden affects future decisions. Can you buy a home? Can you move cities? Can you start a business? Can you take risks? Can you save? Can you invest? Can you build wealth? The answers become more complicated when debt follows you everywhere. But here's the part many people miss. Student loans weren't the real problem. They were merely the first signal. The first warning sign that something deeper was happening. The American dream had always relied on a powerful assumption. That each generation would move forward. That effort would create progress. That success would become easier to reach. Instead, for many people, success was becoming more expensive. And when success becomes more expensive, the dream begins to change. Meet Sarah, 29 years old, college graduate, good job, responsible, hardworking, exactly the kind of person society tells should succeed. She followed every rule, studied hard, earned good grades, graduated, built a career, and yet, she feels trapped, not because she lacks income, but because every step forward seems to create another financial obligation. Student loans, rent, healthcare, transportation, insurance, utilities, taxes, living costs. The more she earns, the more expensive life seems to become. And Sarah isn't alone. Millions of Americans share the same feeling, a feeling that they're running faster, without actually getting ahead. Think about how different this is from the original dream. The original dream promised that hard work would create freedom. But increasingly, hard work seemed to create maintenance. People weren't running toward prosperity. They were running to stay in place, running to keep up, running to avoid falling behind. And the psychological effect was enormous, because when effort stops producing visible progress, frustration grows, anxiety grows, doubt grows. People begin asking questions, questions their parents rarely asked, questions their grandparents almost never asked. Questions like, why am I doing everything right and still struggling? Why does success feel so fragile? Why am I working harder than ever but feeling less secure? Those questions would soon spread across an entire generation. Yet even education wasn't the biggest challenge facing modern Americans. Not even close. Because while millions were focused on degrees, another force was quietly transforming the economy. A force so powerful, it would eventually reshape entire cities, entire communities, entire lives. A force connected to the single largest purchase most people ever make, their home. For decades, home ownership represented stability, security, achievement, the heart of the American dream itself. But what happened next would change everything, because the place where Americans once built wealth was slowly becoming the place where many could no longer afford to enter. And when housing began slipping out of reach, the dream faced its biggest test yet. The American dream wasn't collapsing all at once. It was being priced out of existence. And nowhere was that more visible than the housing market. For generations, owning a home wasn't just about having a place to live. It was a milestone, a symbol, proof that your hard work was paying off. A home meant stability. It meant roots. It meant belonging. And perhaps most importantly, it meant building wealth. Month after month, year after year, families made mortgage payments. And with every payment, they owned a little more of their future. At least that was the idea. For decades, millions of Americans believed that if they worked hard and saved responsibly, home ownership would eventually be within reach. Not easy, but possible. And that belief became one of the foundations of modern America. A house was more than a building. It represented progress. Parents wanted it for their children. Children expected it for themselves. It became part of the life script. Graduate, find a job, get married, buy a home, start a family, build a future. Simple, predictable, achievable, or at least, it used to be. Today, that script looks very different, because something happened to housing. Something few people fully understood until it was already happening. Prices began rising. Then they kept rising, and rising, and rising, year after year, in city after city, across entire regions. Homes that once seemed affordable suddenly became unreachable. Neighborhoods changed. Markets exploded. Competition intensified. And the dream that once felt normal began feeling extraordinary. Imagine saving for years, skipping vacations, working overtime, building a down payment, doing everything responsibly, then discovering that housing prices rose faster than your savings. You weren't moving closer to your goal. The goal was moving away from you. And for many Americans, that's exactly what happened. Every year they waited. The target became more distant. Every year they saved. Prices climbed higher. Every year they worked. Ownership became harder to reach. Not because they stopped trying, because the rules were changing faster than they could adapt. Meet David and Emily. Both employed, both educated, both doing everything society recommends. Together they earn a respectable income, the kind of income that once would have comfortably supported home ownership. Yet every time they run the numbers, the answer is the same. Not yet. Not this year. Maybe next year. But next year arrives, and prices have increased again. Interest rates change. Insurance costs rise. Property taxes grow. And suddenly the dream feels farther away than before. What's happening here isn't just financial. It's psychological. Because home ownership represented more than shelter. It represented progress. A visible sign that life was moving forward. When people lose confidence in that progress, something deeper changes. They begin questioning the future. They begin questioning the system. They begin questioning whether the dream still exists at all. And then came another reality. Rent. For millions who couldn't buy, renting became the only option. At first that seemed temporary, a stepping stone, a short phase before ownership. But for many Americans, temporary became permanent. Years passed, then more years, and rent kept rising. Every lease renewal brought uncertainty. Every move became more expensive. Every month felt like money disappearing into a black hole. No equity, no ownership, no long-term security. Just another payment, and another, and another. Think about the emotional impact. You work hard. You earn a decent income. You pay thousands every month for housing. Yet at the end of the year, you own nothing more than you did before. No additional asset. No growing ownership stake. No increasing control over your future. Only higher costs. This is where many Americans began feeling something unfamiliar. Not failure. Not poverty. But stagnation. The sense that no matter how hard they pushed, they weren't moving forward. And perhaps the most frustrating part? Many were doing exactly what previous generations did. Working, saving, planning, being responsible. Yet the outcomes looked dramatically different. The same actions no longer produced the same results. And when that happens, people start losing faith in the process itself. But housing wasn't acting alone. In fact, housing was only one piece of a much larger transformation. Because while Americans struggled with rising housing costs, another force was quietly expanding. A force designed to make expensive things feel affordable. A force that would reshape consumer behavior across the entire economy. A force built on one simple idea. Borrow now, pay later. At first, it seemed helpful, convenient, even empowering. But over time, it would become one of the most powerful engines of financial pressure in modern America. Because the dream was no longer being purchased with savings. It was increasingly being financed with debt. And that changed everything. The American dream once depended on ownership. Now it increasingly depended on borrowing. And those two systems produce very different futures. One builds wealth. The other builds obligations. One creates freedom. The other creates dependency. And as debt expanded across the country, millions of Americans found themselves entering a new economic reality. A reality where almost everything could be financed. Cars, education, furniture, electronics, vacations, even everyday purchases. The question was no longer, can you afford it? The question became, can you afford the monthly payment? And that subtle shift would change the entire culture. Because when a society stops asking what things cost and starts asking what the monthly payment is, something important has changed. Something profound. Something dangerous. And that's exactly where our story goes next. The American dream wasn't just becoming expensive. It was becoming leveraged. And the consequences would reach far beyond housing. Because the next chapter isn't about homes. It's about debt. The invisible force quietly shaping millions of lives. A strange thing happened in America. People didn't stop buying things. In fact, they started buying more. Bigger homes. More expensive cars. Better phones. More subscriptions. More services. More convenience. More everything. And for a while, it looked like prosperity. Stores were full. Restaurants were busy. New products were everywhere. The economy appeared strong. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had changed. People weren't necessarily buying ownership anymore. They were buying payments. Think back to the original American dream. The goal wasn't endless consumption. The goal was stability. A paid-off home. A reliable car. Savings. Retirement. Security. The dream wasn't about constantly owing money. It was about eventually owning your future. But as the decades passed, debt became woven into everyday life. So gradually, that many people stopped noticing. Notice how products are rarely sold using their total price anymore. A car isn't presented as $40,000. It's presented as only $599 a month. A couch isn't $2,000. It's just $49 a month. A phone isn't $1,500. It's only $39 a month. Everything became a payment. Everything became a subscription. Everything became manageable, at least on the surface. And that's what made the system so powerful. Because monthly payments feel small. Small enough to justify. Small enough to ignore. Small enough to stack. One payment doesn't seem dangerous. Neither does 2, or 3, or 5. But eventually, those payments begin to consume the future. This is the reality many Americans face. Not because they're irresponsible. Not because they're foolish. Because modern life increasingly operates on obligations. The paycheck arrives. And before you even touch it, someone else already has a claim on it. The bank, the lender, the credit card company, the landlord, the subscription service, the insurance provider. One by one, pieces of your future income have already been promised away. Here's the problem with debt. Debt allows you to bring tomorrow's money into today. That sounds wonderful. Until tomorrow arrives. Then the bill comes due. And now tomorrow's income is already committed. Which means future freedom becomes smaller. Future choices become fewer. Future flexibility begins disappearing. Debt doesn't always create immediate pain. Sometimes it creates invisible pressure. Pressure that builds slowly, quietly, month after month, year after year, until one day, you realize you're working primarily to maintain obligations, not to create freedom. Imagine 2 workers. Both earn the same salary. One owes almost nothing. The other owes payments everywhere. On paper, they look identical. Same income, same city, same profession. But their realities are completely different. One paycheck creates options. The other paycheck creates survival. This is why income alone rarely tells the whole story. Because wealth isn't just about what comes in. It's about what remains. And this is where many Americans began feeling trapped. Not poor. Trapped. Because every raise seemed to disappear. Every promotion felt temporary. Every increase in income was matched by increasing costs. A better apartment. A newer car. Higher insurance. More spending. More obligations. More debt. And before long, the financial freedom they expected never arrived. But perhaps the most fascinating part of the debt economy is that it doesn't rely on force. People choose it willingly. Every day. Because debt often promises something emotionally powerful. Convenience. Status. Comfort. Speed. The ability to enjoy life now instead of later. And humans naturally prefer now. We are wired that way. We value immediate rewards. We discount future consequences, which makes debt incredibly attractive, especially when everyone around us is doing the same thing. Then came social media, and everything accelerated. For the first time in history, people could compare their lives to thousands of others every single day. A stranger buys a luxury car. You see it. Someone takes an expensive vacation. You see it. Someone moves into a beautiful home. You see it. Someone upgrades their lifestyle. You see it. Again, and again, and again. What you don't see is the debt, the stress, the payments, the financial pressure behind the image. You see the highlight reel, never the monthly statement. And that's where the debt economy became something even larger. It became cultural. Success wasn't measured by financial security. It was measured by appearance. How successful do you look? How impressive does your life seem? How expensive are the things around you? And once status enters the equation, the game changes completely. Because status has no finish line. There is always someone richer, someone newer, someone bigger, someone more successful, which means the pursuit never ends. The original American dream promised stability. The modern economy often sells aspiration, and those are very different goals. Stability says, build a life. Aspiration says, upgrade your life. One has an ending, the other doesn't. One creates contentment, the other creates endless pursuit. And for millions of Americans, that endless pursuit became exhausting. For most of human history, people compared themselves to neighbors, friends, co-workers, people nearby. Today, people compare themselves to the entire internet. And that changes everything. Because when comparison becomes global, contentment becomes harder than ever. And that may be one of the most important economic stories of our time. The American dream wasn't just being reshaped by money. It was being reshaped by psychology. And in the next chapter, we'll explore how social media, comparison, and modern culture created a new kind of financial pressure. One that no previous generation ever had to face. For most of human history, comparison had limits. You compared yourself to people you actually knew. Your neighbors, your co-workers, your friends, maybe the wealthiest family in town, maybe the successful business owner down the street. That was your world. That was your reference point. And because comparison had boundaries, expectations had boundaries too. But then something happened. A small device entered billions of lives, the smartphone. And with it came something humanity had never experienced before: unlimited comparison. Today, before breakfast, a person can see more wealth, more luxury, more success than their grandparents saw in an entire year. And that changes the way people think. Because human beings don't judge success in isolation. We judge it relative to others. Psychologists have known this for decades. A person earning $100,000 may feel wealthy in one environment and poor in another. The income didn't change. Only the comparison changed. And social media changed comparison forever. For the first time in history, millions of people began comparing their everyday reality to someone else's highlight reel. Every day, every hour, sometimes every minute. And the effects were profound. A worker drives home after a long day. He opens social media. Someone his age is buying a mansion. Another is vacationing in Dubai. Another claims to be making $50,000 per month online. Another is showing off a luxury car. Suddenly, a perfectly normal life begins to feel inadequate. Not because anything is wrong, but because expectations have changed. The benchmark moved. And it moved again. And again. And again. Until ordinary success no longer felt successful. Think about how dangerous that is. Imagine achieving goals that previous generations considered remarkable. A stable career, a safe home, a healthy family, a retirement account, no major financial problems. For decades, that would have been considered success. Today, many people barely notice those achievements because their attention is focused elsewhere, on people who appear richer, more successful, more glamorous, more exciting. But social media doesn't simply show reality. It selects reality. It filters reality. It edits reality. People share victories, rarely failures, profits, rarely losses, luxury vacations, rarely credit card statements, expensive cars, rarely monthly payments. The result? A distorted picture of success. One that makes ordinary life appear smaller than it really is. And here's where the comparison trap becomes financial. Because comparison doesn't just affect emotions. It affects behavior. People buy things they weren't planning to buy. Upgrade things that didn't need upgrading. Spend money they weren't planning to spend. Not because they need more, because they feel behind. Modern advertising understands this perfectly. In fact, many industries depend on it. The goal isn't necessarily to convince you that a product is useful. The goal is to convince you that your current situation is inadequate, that you're missing something, that everyone else is moving forward, and you're standing still. Because insecurity is profitable. Very profitable. The original American dream was built around sufficiency. Enough income, enough stability, enough security, enough opportunity. But modern consumer culture often revolves around something different. Never enough. A bigger house, a newer car, a better phone, a more impressive lifestyle, a larger audience, a higher income, a bigger achievement. The finish line keeps moving. And if the finish line keeps moving, you never arrive. Meet Alex, 38 years old, good job, good income, healthy family, owns a home, has retirement savings. By nearly every objective measure, Alex is successful, yet he doesn't feel successful. Why? Because every day, he sees people who appear to have more money, more freedom, more luxury, more excitement, and over time, those comparisons reshape his perception, not of them, of himself. This may be one of the greatest hidden costs of the digital age. Not financial poverty, perceived poverty, the feeling that you're behind, even when you're doing well, the feeling that you're failing, even when you're succeeding, the feeling that you're losing, even when you're winning. And millions of people experience this every day. But here's the irony. Many of the people being admired online are trapped too. Different house, different car, different income, same pressure. Because comparison affects everyone, even wealthy people. There is always another level, always another benchmark, always another person with more. And that's why comparison is so powerful. It has no natural endpoint. The American dream once offered something incredibly valuable. A destination. A sense that if you worked hard enough, you could eventually arrive. Modern culture often offers something else. An endless race. An endless pursuit. An endless chase. And that chase can be exhausting. But while Americans were comparing themselves to each other, another transformation was taking place. One that few people noticed. Because it happened quietly. Gradually, subscription by subscription, payment by payment, month by month, the economy itself was changing. Ownership was disappearing. Access was replacing it. And this shift would affect nearly every aspect of modern life. The American dream once centered around ownership. Owning a house, owning a car, owning assets, owning your future. But increasingly, modern life was becoming subscription-based. Not ownership, access. And that subtle change would have enormous consequences. Because when everything becomes a monthly payment, financial freedom becomes harder to achieve. The American dream wasn't disappearing all at once. It was being replaced piece by piece. One payment at a time. One subscription at a time. One obligation at a time. And in the next chapter, we'll explore how America quietly became a subscription economy. And why that matters more than most people realize.